The iron bars felt cold against Jack Morrison's calloused hands as he pressed his forehead against them, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky crimson through the narrow window of his cell. Knowing that tomorrow might be his last day breathing free air if the judge decided hanging was justice for a crime he never committed. The town of Redemption Springs had never seen such scandal in all its 20 years of existence, not since the railroad came through in 1867 and brought civilization to this dusty corner of West Texas. Now, in the summer of 1885, the whole town buzzed with gossip about how Jack Morrison, a drifter who had worked the past 6 months on various ranches around the territory, had supposedly stolen 50 head of prime cattle from Samuel Hartwell's sprawling Double H ranch. The evidence seemed damning enough. Jack had been found 3 miles from the Hartwell property line with a running iron in his saddlebag and cattle tracks leading straight from the direction of the ranch. The town sheriff, a pot-bellied man named Wade Hutchins who had been friends with Samuel Hartwell since their Army days, had arrested Jack without much investigation beyond the surface facts. Jack had protested his innocence from the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, but his words fell on deaf ears. He was a drifter, after all, with no family to vouch for his character and no property to his name except his horse, his saddle, and the few dollars in his pocket. Samuel Hartwell, on the other hand, was one of the most respected ranchers in 3 counties, a man who employed 30 cowhands and whose wife had died giving birth to their only child 18 years ago. The scales of frontier justice were not balanced in Jack's favor. What Jack did not know was that Samuel Hartwell's daughter, Catherine, had been watching from the ridge above the place where Sheriff Hutchins had made the arrest. Catherine Hartwell was not the sort of woman who believed everything she was told without question. At 18 years old, she had grown up without a mother's gentle guidance, raised instead by her father and the rough but good-hearted ranch hands who worked the Double H. She could ride as well as any man, shoot straighter than most, and had learned from her father's own example to look at evidence before making judgments. Something about the arrest had struck her as wrong from the very beginning. She had been out riding that morning, checking on the line shack at the northern boundary of their property, when she heard the commotion. From her vantage point on the ridge, she had watched the sheriff and his deputies surround a lone rider. She had recognized the horse first, a distinctive paint gelding that belonged to Jack Morrison, the cowboy who had worked briefly on their ranch 2 months ago during the spring branding. Her father had let him go not because of any fault in his work, but simply because they had finished the seasonal work and did not need the extra hands. Jack had thanked her father politely, collected his wages, and ridden off toward the neighboring counties to find more work. Catherine had noticed Jack during those few weeks he worked the Double H, though she had been careful not to show it. He was different from the other ranch hands, quieter and more thoughtful, with startling green eyes that seemed to look right through a person's defenses. He was perhaps 24 or 25 years old, tall and lean with the sun-bronzed skin of a man who lived his life outdoors. She had caught him reading a book one evening when the other hands were playing cards and drinking, and that small detail had intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. Most of the cowhands she knew could barely write their own names, let alone read for pleasure. Now, standing in the dusty street outside the sheriff's office 3 days after the arrest, Catherine clutched a worn leather journal to her chest and tried to gather her courage. The journal had belonged to her father, or so she had thought until she started reading it more carefully. She had found it in the bunkhouse, tucked beneath a loose floorboard she had discovered by accident when she dropped her riding glove and it slipped between the cracks. What she read in those pages had turned her understanding of the situation completely upside down. The door to the sheriff's office creaked as she pushed it open. Sheriff Hutchins looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from surprise to condescension when he saw who had entered. "Miss Hartwell, this is not a proper place for a young lady," he said, rising from his chair with the exaggerated courtesy men often used when they wanted to dismiss a woman without appearing rude. "If you have concerns about the Rustling case, you should speak to your father." "I need to see the prisoner," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I have information about the case." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. "Now, Miss Catherine, your father would not want you anywhere near a criminal. The trial is set for tomorrow and justice will be served. You just go on home and let the men handle this business." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Sheriff Hutchins, I have evidence that might prove Jack Morrison's innocence." "Are you going to hear what I have to say? Or do I need to ride to the territorial courthouse in Austin and speak to the judge directly?" The mention of going over his head made the sheriff's face redden. He exchanged a glance with his deputy, a young man named Billy Carter who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the whole conversation. "What kind of evidence?" Hutchins asked, his tone sharp now. Catherine held up the journal. "I found this in our bunkhouse. It contains entries that prove someone else had access to our cattle and was planning to steal them. The handwriting does not match any of our regular hands, and the dates correspond exactly with when the cattle went missing." Sheriff Hutchins reached for the journal, but Catherine pulled it back. "I will show it to you, but I want to see Jack Morrison first. I need to ask him some questions." The standoff lasted several long seconds. Finally, the sheriff grunted and gestured toward the back of the office where the cells were located. "5 minutes, Miss Hartwell, and Billy stays with you." "I will not have it said that I let a young lady be alone with a prisoner, innocent or not." Catherine nodded, relief flooding through her. She followed Deputy Carter through the doorway into the small cell area. There were only 2 cells, and Jack Morrison occupied the one on the left. He was sitting on the narrow cot, his head in his hands, but he looked up when he heard footsteps. The surprise on his face when he saw Catherine was almost comical. He stood quickly, his hands gripping the bars. "Miss Hartwell, what are you doing here?" Up close, Catherine could see the toll the past 3 days had taken on him. His face was haggard, his eyes shadowed with worry and exhaustion. But there was no guilt in those green eyes, only confusion and the kind of desperate hope that comes from having given up hope entirely, and then seeing a glimmer of possibility. "I am here because I think you are innocent," Catherine said, her voice low enough that the deputy, who had positioned himself near the door, would have to strain to hear. "And I think I know who really stole our cattle." Jack's fingers tightened on the bars. "Miss Hartwell, I appreciate your faith, but unless you have proof, the judge is going to rule against me tomorrow. Your father is convinced I am guilty, and Sheriff Hutchins has already made up his mind." "I have proof," Catherine said, and she opened the journal to show him. "I found this hidden in the bunkhouse. Look at these entries." Jack leaned forward, his eyes scanning the pages she showed him. Catherine watched his expression change as he read, saw the moment comprehension dawned. "This is Frank Turner's handwriting," Jack said slowly. "I worked with him on the Patterson Ranch last year. He always made his letter F with that distinctive loop." Catherine nodded eagerly. "Frank Turner signed on with us as a temporary hand about 3 months ago. He left suddenly, the same week the cattle disappeared. My father assumed he just moved on to another job, the way many seasonal workers do. But these journal entries tell a different story. He was planning to steal the cattle and sell them across the border in Mexico. He even wrote about setting up someone else to take the blame." Jack looked up at her, and for the first time since his arrest, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Did he mention my name?" "No, but he wrote about needing to plant evidence on one of the drifters passing through. You fit that description, and you were in the area at the right time." Catherine flipped to another page. "Look here, he even drew a map showing where he planned to hide the cattle before moving them south. This location is not on our property. It is in the canyon lands about 10 miles west of here." "Time is up, Miss Hartwell," Deputy Carter called from the doorway. Catherine closed the journal and met Jack's eyes. "I am going to show this to the sheriff and to my father. They have to believe this evidence." Your father thinks I am a thief, Jack said quietly. Why would he listen to you about this? Because he taught me to look at facts, not assumptions, Catherine replied, and because I will make him listen. She turned to leave, but Jack called her name softly. When she looked back, he was gripping the bars so tightly his knuckles were white. Why are you doing this? He asked. You do not know me. For all you know, I could be guilty. Catherine met his gaze steadily. I watched you work on our ranch for 3 weeks, Jack Morrison. I saw how you treated the horses, how you helped old Pete fix the corral fence even though it was not your job, how you shared your food with the stray dog that wandered into camp. A man who does those things is not a cattle thief. And besides, she added, allowing herself a small smile, I read some of those same books you carry in your saddlebag. A man who loves Charles Dickens cannot be all bad. Before Jack could respond, she swept out of the cell area, leaving him staring after her with an expression somewhere between astonishment and something else. Something that made Catherine's heart beat just a little faster as she returned to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hutchins was less convinced by the journal than Catherine had hoped. He examined it with narrowed eyes, flipping through the pages with rough hands that treated the evidence carelessly. This proves nothing, Miss Hartwell, he said finally. For all I know, Morrison wrote this himself to throw suspicion on someone else. Frank Turner left weeks ago. He could be anywhere by now. Then send someone to look for the cattle at the location marked in the journal, Catherine insisted. If they are there, that proves Frank Turner was involved. And if Jack Morrison was the real thief, why would he still be in the area? Why would not he have already sold the cattle and left the territory? The sheriff opened his mouth to respond, but the door to his office burst open and Samuel Hartwell strode in. Catherine's father was an imposing man even at 52 years old, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that could shift from kindness to fury in an instant. Right now, his expression was somewhere in between. Catherine, what are you doing here? He demanded. One of the hands told me you rode into town over an hour ago. I have been looking all over for you. Papa, I found evidence that proves Jack Morrison is innocent, Catherine said, holding up the journal before her father could start lecturing her about proper behavior. Please, just look at this. Samuel Hartwell's expression shifted from anger to confusion to careful attention as Catherine explained what she had found. Unlike the sheriff, her father listened without interrupting, and Catherine could see his sharp mind working through the implications of what she was telling him. When she finished, Samuel took the journal from her hands and studied it carefully. The silence in the office stretched out, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sounds of the town going about its evening business. This is Frank Turner's handwriting, Samuel said finally. I recognize it from the work logs he signed. That is what Jack Morrison said too, Catherine added quickly. He worked with Frank at the Patterson Ranch last year. Sheriff Hutchins shifted his considerable weight from one foot to the other. Even if Turner wrote this, it does not necessarily mean Morrison was not involved. They could have been working together. Then why was Morrison found with nothing but a running iron? Samuel countered. If he had stolen 50 head of cattle, where are they? Where is the money from selling them? His pockets were nearly empty when you arrested him, Wade. That does not fit the profile of a successful cattle thief. Catherine felt a surge of hope. Her father was listening, really listening. She pressed her advantage. Papa, the journal mentions hiding the cattle in the canyon lands before moving them to Mexico. If we ride out there now, we might find them. We might even find evidence that Frank Turner is still in the area. Samuel Hartwell looked at his daughter for a long moment, and Catherine saw something in his eyes she had not seen in years, not since her mother died. It was respect, pure and simple, the kind of respect one adult gives another when they recognize capability and courage. We will need men and supplies if we are riding into the canyon lands, Samuel said, making up his mind. Wade, I am formally withdrawing my accusation against Jack Morrison until we can investigate this further. I want him released into my custody." "Now hold on, Sam," the sheriff protested. "The trial is tomorrow. The judge is already in town. We cannot just release a prisoner because your daughter found some journal that might or might not be real evidence." Samuel's expression hardened. "That prisoner is only in your jail because I accused him, Wade. If I am withdrawing that accusation, you have no grounds to hold him. Unless you want to explain to the territorial judge why you are keeping a man imprisoned without a complainant, I suggest you release him now." The two men locked eyes and Catherine held her breath. Finally, Sheriff Hutchins cursed under his breath and reached for his keys. "Fine, but he stays in your custody, Sam. If he runs, it is on your head. And I am coming with you to the Canyon lands. If there are cattle thieves out there, this is still my jurisdiction." 20 minutes later, Catherine stood in the dusty street and watched as Jack Morrison emerged from the sheriff's office, blinking in the fading sunlight like a man who had expected to see the sun set from behind bars, and instead found himself free. His eyes found her immediately, and the gratitude in them made her look away, suddenly shy. "Morrison," Samuel Hartwell's voice cut through the moment. "My daughter seems to think you are innocent, and I am inclined to believe her. But if you are playing some kind of game, I will find out, and I will make sure you hang for it. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Jack said, his voice steady. "I appreciate the chance to prove my innocence. I did not steal your cattle, Mr. Hartwell. I give you my word on that." "A man's word used to mean something in this territory," Samuel said. "I hope yours still does. Now we are putting together a search party to ride out to the Canyon lands at first light. You will come with us, and you will help us track down whoever really did steal my herd. If we find Frank Turner and those cattle, you are a free man. If we do not, well, the trial will proceed as scheduled." "I will do whatever it takes to clear my name," Jack replied. Samuel nodded curtly and turned to start organizing the search party. Catherine lingered a moment longer and Jack stepped closer to her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I do not know why you believed in me, but I will not forget it." "I told you why," Catherine replied, meeting his eyes. "I saw who you were when you worked on our ranch. That man was not a thief." "I saw you too," Jack said, and there was something in his voice that made Catherine's breath catch. "I noticed you watching me sometimes when you thought I was not paying attention. I wanted to talk to you, but I was just a hired hand and you were the rancher's daughter. It would not have been proper." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "Nothing about this situation is proper, Mr. Morrison. I just visited you in a jail cell and possibly saved you from hanging. I think we are beyond worrying about propriety." A slow smile spread across Jack's face, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from haggard to handsome in an instant. "I suppose you are right about that, Miss Hartwell. Though I have to say, I would have preferred our next conversation to happen under different circumstances." "Catherine," she said impulsively, "you can call me Catherine. Only if you call me Jack," he replied. They stood there in the dusty street as the sun set, and the town of Redemption Springs prepared for nightfall. And Catherine felt something shift in her chest. Something that had nothing to do with proving innocence or finding stolen cattle, and everything to do with the way Jack Morrison looked at her, like she was the most remarkable person he had ever met. "Catherine," her father's voice broke the spell. "Stop dawdling and get home. We have an early start tomorrow and you will need your rest." Catherine started to protest that she was coming on the search party, but Jack spoke first. "He is right, you should rest. You have done enough for one day." "I am coming with you tomorrow," Catherine said firmly. "I found the evidence and I am going to see this through." Jack's expression turned concerned. "The Canyon lands are rough territory. It could be dangerous." "I have been riding since I was 4 years old, and I can shoot as well as any man in this town," Catherine replied. "I am coming, and that is final." She turned and walked toward her horse before either Jack or her father could argue further. Behind her, she heard Jack laugh softly, a sound that seemed rusty from disuse but genuine nonetheless. "She is stubborn," Samuel Hartwell said, his voice carrying in the quiet evening air. "She is remarkable," Jack replied, and Catherine smiled to herself as she mounted her horse and turned toward home. That night, Catherine lay awake in her bedroom at the ranch house, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events in her mind. She had spent the evening convincing her father that she absolutely was going on the search party, using every logical argument she could muster. Samuel had finally relented when she pointed out that she was the one who had found the journal and studied its contents most carefully. She knew the location marked on the map better than anyone else, having spent her whole life exploring the territory around the Double H Ranch. But it was not thoughts of the search that kept her awake. It was the memory of Jack Morrison's eyes, the way he had looked at her with such gratitude, and something else, something deeper that made her heart race. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. 3 weeks of watching him work from a distance, and one conversation through jail cell bars did not constitute a real acquaintance. Yet she could not shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a path that would change her life forever. In town, Jack Morrison lay on a cot in the back room of the general store, courtesy of Samuel Hartwell, who had arranged lodging for him under the watchful eye of the store owner. Jack stared at the same ceiling that Catherine was staring at, though his was water-stained and cracked rather than smooth, painted wood. He thought about the astonishing turn his fortunes had taken in a single day, from condemned man to free man, all because of a young woman who had believed in him when no one else would. Catherine Hartwell was unlike any woman Jack had ever met. Most women of his acquaintance, limited as it was, either simpered and giggled or treated him with the wariness reserved for drifters and hired hands. Catherine did neither. She looked him straight in the eye when she spoke, her gaze clear and intelligent, and she talked to him like an equal rather than a subordinate or a threat. She was beautiful too, with thick chestnut hair that she wore in a practical braid and dark brown eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense. But it was her courage and her sense of justice that truly amazed him. She had risked her reputation and possibly her relationship with her father to prove a drifter's innocence. Jack had left his home in Missouri 5 years ago, after his parents died in a cholera outbreak that swept through their county. He had been 20 years old, orphaned and alone, with nothing to keep him tied to the small farm that held so many memories of loss. He had drifted west, working cattle ranches and horse farms, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. He had taught himself to read better during the long, lonely nights, borrowing books from whoever would lend them and buying cheap dime novels when he had spare coin. The life suited him in many ways, the freedom and the open sky, but lately he had begun to feel the weight of his rootlessness, the lack of purpose beyond the next job and the next sunset. Now, lying in the dark and thinking about Catherine Hartwell, Jack felt something shift inside him. It was too soon to call it hope, too fragile to examine too closely, but it was there nonetheless, a tiny spark that said maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth staying for. The search party assembled at dawn, when the sky was still more gray than blue, and the morning star hung low on the horizon. Samuel Hartwell had gathered 10 of his most trusted ranch hands, all men who could ride hard and shoot straight if the need arose. Sheriff Hutchins came with his deputy Billy Carter, both armed with rifles and grim expressions that suggested they still had doubts about the whole enterprise. Jack Morrison arrived on his paint gelding, wearing the same dusty clothes he had been arrested in, his own rifle slung across his saddle. Catherine arrived last, riding her favorite mare, a quick-footed sorrel named Copper. She wore split-riding skirts and a practical cotton shirt, with her hair braided down her back and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. The ranch hands who had known her since childhood barely reacted to her presence, but Sheriff Hutchins scowled. "This is no place for a woman, Sam," the sheriff said. "You should send her back to the ranch house." "My daughter has proven herself more than capable," Samuel replied, his tone brooking no argument. She is the one who studied that journal most carefully, and she knows these lands as well as any of us. She stays. Catherine shot her father a grateful look and nudged Copper forward to where Jack sat on his horse. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice light despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Morning," Jack replied, and the warmth in his eyes chased away her nervousness. "Are you sure about this? It is not too late to change your mind." "I never change my mind once it is made up," Catherine replied. "My father says it is my most irritating quality." "I would say it is one of your best qualities," Jack said quietly, and the compliment sent a rush of pleasure through her that had nothing to do with proving him innocent and everything to do with the way he looked at her. The search party rode out as the sun crested the horizon, turning the Texas plains golden. They headed west, away from the Double H Ranch, and toward the canyon lands that marked the boundary between settled ranch country and wild territory. The land here was harsh and beautiful, all red rock formations and scattered mesquite trees, with dry creek beds that flooded dangerously during the rare rainstorms and baked to cracked earth the rest of the year. Catherine rode near the front of the group with her father and Jack, the journal tucked safely in her saddlebag. They had studied the hand-drawn map together before leaving, trying to pinpoint the exact location Frank Turner had marked. The map was not precise, but it showed a distinctive rock formation that Catherine recognized, a place the locals called Devil's Chimney because of the way the wind howled through a natural hole in the stone. If Turner's map is accurate, the cattle should be hidden in a box canyon about 2 miles past Devil's Chimney, Catherine explained as they rode. There is only one way in and out, which makes it a perfect place to hide livestock temporarily, but it is also dangerous if you get trapped in there. "How do you know about this place?" Jack asked, genuinely curious. "I have explored every inch of this territory since I was old enough to ride alone," Catherine replied. "My father was always worried I would get lost or hurt, but I learned the land like some people learn books. Every rock formation, every water source, every game trail, it is like reading a story written in stone and earth." Jack smiled at that description. "I like the way you think about it. Most people just see dirt and rocks, but you see something more." "Everything tells a story if you know how to look at it," Catherine said. "That is how I knew something was wrong with your arrest. The story did not make sense. A successful cattle thief would not still be in the area with empty pockets and only a running iron to show for his crime." The facts did not fit the conclusion. Samuel Hartwell, riding on Catherine's other side, glanced at his daughter with an expression that mixed pride and surprise. "You have been paying attention all these years when I talked about evaluating evidence." "I always pay attention, Papa," Catherine replied. "You just do not always notice." They rode in silence for a while, the horses picking their way carefully over the rocky terrain. The sun climbed higher and the temperature rose with it. By mid-morning, they had reached Devil's Chimney, the distinctive rock formation jutting up from the landscape like a crooked finger pointing at the sky. The wind whistled through the natural opening near the top, creating an eerie sound that gave the place its name. "The box canyon should be northeast of here," Catherine said, consulting the map again. "Maybe an hour's ride if we keep a steady pace." Sheriff Hutchins pushed his horse forward. "Let us spread out a bit, keep our eyes open. If Turner is hiding cattle out here, he might have men watching the area." They proceeded more cautiously now, the ranch hands spreading out in a loose line with rifles at the ready. Catherine felt her heart beating faster, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. What if they were wrong? What if the cattle were not there? What if Frank Turner had moved them already, or sold them, or driven them into Mexico as the journal suggested he planned to do? Jack seemed to sense her worry because he maneuvered his horse closer to hers. "Whatever we find, you did the right thing by looking for the truth," he said quietly. "That takes courage, standing up against what everyone else believes." "I just followed the evidence," Catherine replied, but she was grateful for his words nonetheless. "You did more than that. You took a risk for someone you barely know. That is not just about evidence, that is about character." Before Catherine could respond, one of the ranch hands up ahead let out a low whistle and raised his hand to signal a halt. The whole party reined in their horses, and Samuel Hartwell rode forward to see what had been spotted. Catherine and Jack followed, urging their horses up a small rise. When they crested the top, Catherine felt a surge of vindication so strong it made her dizzy. Below them, hidden in a natural depression between rock walls, was a small box canyon. And in that canyon, peacefully grazing on the sparse grass, were at least 40 head of cattle bearing the Double H brand. "Well, I will be damned," Sheriff Hutchins muttered, riding up beside them. The journal was telling the truth. Samuel Hartwell's face was grim as he studied the scene below. "That is my stock, all right. The question is, where is Frank Turner?" As if in answer to his question, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed off the canyon walls. The bullet struck a rock near Samuel's horse, sending stone chips flying. The horse reared, and Samuel fought to control it as the whole search party scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and mesquite trees. "There," Jack shouted, pointing toward the far end of the box canyon. Two riders were racing away from a small camp that had been hidden among the rocks, clearly spooked by the arrival of the search party. "That is Turner on the gray horse," one of the ranch hands yelled. "I would recognize that animal anywhere." Sheriff Hutchins was already spurring his horse forward, Deputy Carter close behind. Several of the ranch hands followed, whooping and drawing their weapons. Samuel Hartwell grabbed Catherine's arm as she started to follow. "You stay here," he commanded. "This could get dangerous." "Papa, I am not a child," Catherine protested, but her father's grip was firm. "No, you are my daughter and the only family I have left. You stay here with two of the hands where it is safe. That is an order, Catherine, not a request." Before she could argue further, Samuel rode off after the others, leaving Catherine with Jack and two ranch hands named Pete and Tom. Catherine watched in frustration as the chase disappeared around a bend in the canyon. "He is only trying to protect you," Jack said gently, though he had not followed the others either. "I know that, but I hate being left behind like I am helpless," Catherine said. "I can shoot and ride as well as any of them." "No one thinks you are helpless," Jack assured her. "But your father just got his cattle back and discovered who the real thief is. He is not going to risk losing his daughter today, too." Catherine took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. Jack was right, of course. She had accomplished what she set out to do. The cattle were found, Jack's innocence was proven, and Frank Turner was being pursued by the law. Everything else was just her pride talking. The sound of distant gunfire drifted back to them, 2 or 3 shots in quick succession, then silence. Catherine felt her stomach clench with worry. What if someone was hurt? What if her father was hurt? The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Old Pete, who had worked for the Double H since before Catherine was born, tried to distract her with a story about the time he had tracked a mountain lion for 3 days, but she could barely focus on his words. Jack sat quietly on his horse beside her, and she found his presence oddly comforting. He was not trying to fill the silence with empty reassurances or treat her like a fragile thing that might break. He simply stayed close, and somehow that was enough. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the search party began to return. Catherine counted heads anxiously and felt relief flood through her when she saw her father riding at the front, unharmed. Sheriff Hutchins and Deputy Carter followed, with Frank Turner between them. Turner's hands were tied to his saddle horn, and his face was a mask of rage and defeat. Behind them, the ranch hands drove the stolen cattle, already beginning the process of moving them back toward the Double H. "Is anyone hurt?" Catherine called out as they approached. "Just Turner's pride," Samuel replied, though he looked tired. He tried to make a run for the Mexican border, but his horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and threw him. We had him surrounded before he could get back up. Sheriff Hutchins looked like he had swallowed something sour. "Miss Hartwell, I owe you an apology." You were right about Turner and I was too stubborn to see it. If we had hanged Morrison tomorrow, we would have hanged an innocent man." "Thank you, Sheriff," Catherine said quietly. "I am just glad we found the truth in time." Turner spat in the dirt. "You should have minded your own business, girl. Morrison was the perfect fool to take the blame. He was a drifter with no ties and no one to believe him. Everything would have worked perfectly if you had not gone snooping where you did not belong." "That is enough out of you," Samuel Hartwell said coldly. "You stole from me, Turner. You ate my food, took my wages, and then repaid my trust by stealing my cattle and trying to frame an innocent man for your crime. You are going to prison for a long time, and you will be lucky if that is all that happens to you. Cattle rustling is still a hanging offense in this territory." Turner fell silent, but the hatred in his eyes was palpable. Jack moved his horse closer to Catherine's, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by her father. Samuel studied Jack for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The journey back to Redemption Springs took the rest of the day. They had to move slowly with the cattle, stopping twice to let the animals rest and graze. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if everyone had not been so exhausted. Sheriff Hutchins took custody of Frank Turner and locked him in the very cell Jack had occupied just 24 hours earlier. The ranch hands began the process of driving the cattle back to the Double H, and Samuel Hartwell called a meeting in front of the sheriff's office. "I want to thank all of you for your help today," Samuel said, addressing the assembled men. "We recovered my stock and caught the real thief, and we did it without anyone getting seriously hurt. That is as good an outcome as we could have hoped for." He turned to Jack Morrison, who stood slightly apart from the others. "Morrison, I owe you an apology. I was quick to believe you were guilty, and I am man enough to admit when I am wrong. You are welcome to come back and work the Double H anytime you need a job. I would be proud to have you on my payroll." Jack looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. That means a great deal, sir." Samuel nodded, then turned to his daughter. "Catherine, we need to talk when we get home. Ride with me." Catherine exchanged a glance with Jack, trying to convey reassurance even though she was not sure what her father wanted to discuss. Jack gave her a small smile, and she felt that flutter in her chest again, the one that had nothing to do with rustled cattle and everything to do with the way he looked at her. The ride back to the ranch house was quiet at first. Samuel seemed lost in thought, and Catherine was content to let him work through whatever he needed to say in his own time. Finally, as they were crossing the boundary onto Double H land, her father spoke. "Your mother would have been proud of you today," he said quietly. "You showed courage and intelligence, and you stood up for what was right even when it was not easy. Those are the qualities she tried to teach you before she passed." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected mention of her mother. Samuel rarely spoke about his late wife, and when he did, it was usually with such pain that Catherine tried to avoid the subject. But tonight, there was something different in his voice, something like acceptance mixed with the sorrow. "Thank you, Papa," Catherine said softly. "I just tried to do what you have always taught me. Look at the facts, think for yourself, and do not be afraid to stand alone if you have to." "You did all of that and more," Samuel agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I saw the way Jack Morrison looked at you today. And I saw the way you looked at him." Catherine felt her cheeks heat, grateful for the dimming light that hid her blush. "Papa, I barely know him." "That is why I am mentioning it now," Samuel said. "Catherine, you are 18 years old, and I know I have sheltered you more than I probably should have. But you are not a child anymore, and I cannot protect you from everything, even if I wanted to. Jack Morrison seems like a decent man, but he is also a drifter with no property and no prospects beyond the next ranch job. I want you to be careful with your heart. I am not planning to run away with him tomorrow, if that is what you are worried about," Catherine said, trying to inject some lightness into the conversation even though her heart was pounding. "But you are right that he is a good man. I saw that when he worked for us, and today proved it. He could have been bitter about his arrest, but instead he helped us track down Turner without complaint. That says something about his character. Samuel sighed. Just promise me you will take your time and not make any rash decisions. Love can make even the smartest people do foolish things, and I do not want to see you hurt. I promise, Catherine said, and she meant it. But even as she made the promise, she could not help thinking about Jack's green eyes and the way her heart had felt when he said she was remarkable. Over the next few weeks, life at the Double H Ranch slowly returned to normal. Frank Turner was tried and sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison, a verdict that satisfied most people in Redemption Springs. The stolen cattle were back where they belonged, and the story of how Samuel Hartwell had solved the case spread through the county, earning her a reputation as a woman not to be underestimated. Jack Morrison did come back to work at the Double H, accepting Samuel Hartwell's offer of a job. But this time, things were different. Samuel assigned Jack to work on projects that kept him close to the main ranch house, and Catherine found opportunities to talk with him nearly every day. She told herself she was just being friendly, making sure he felt welcome after the ordeal of being falsely accused. But she knew in her heart it was more than that. They started with small conversations, discussing the weather and the work that needed to be done around the ranch. But gradually, their talks grew longer and more personal. Jack told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the farm his family had owned and the parents he had lost to disease. Catherine shared memories of her mother, stories she had never told anyone else because they hurt too much to speak aloud. Jack listened without trying to fix anything, without offering empty platitudes, and somehow that made it easier to talk. One evening, about 3 weeks after the Canyon Lands expedition, Catherine was working in the ranch house kitchen when Jack appeared at the back door. He held his hat in his hands and looked uncertain, almost shy. "Miss Catherine, do you have a moment?" he asked. "Of course," Catherine said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that. I just wanted to show you something, if you are willing to take a short walk." Catherine glanced toward the front room where her father was reviewing ranch accounts. "Let me tell Papa I am going out for a bit." 5 minutes later, she and Jack were walking across the ranch yard toward the corral. The sun was setting, painting everything in that golden light that only exists for a few perfect minutes each day. Jack led her to a spot behind the barn where the old stray dog that had hung around the ranch during his first employment had reappeared, this time with 3 puppies. "Oh," Catherine breathed, kneeling down to get a closer look at the puppies. They tumbled over each other, all yips and wagging tails, and the mother dog watched with patient eyes. "They are adorable. When did they appear?" "A few days ago," Jack said, kneeling beside her. "I have been bringing them scraps and making sure they have water." "I thought you would like to see them." Catherine picked up one of the puppies, a little brown ball of fur with oversized paws, and laughed when it tried to lick her face. "Thank you for taking care of them, and for thinking of me." "I think of you often," Jack said quietly, and when Catherine looked at him, she found he was not watching the puppies anymore. He was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Jack," she said softly, not sure what she was going to say but needing to say something. "Catherine, I know I have no right to say this," Jack interrupted, his words coming in a rush like he was afraid he would lose his courage if he did not speak quickly. "I am just a hired hand and you are the rancher's daughter. But these past few weeks, getting to talk with you, getting to know you, it has meant everything to me. You saved my life, and somewhere along the way you became the reason I am glad to be alive. I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know, even if nothing can come of it." Catherine set the puppy down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Who says nothing can come of it?" Jack looked at her with such hope it almost hurt to see. "Your father would never approve. I have nothing to offer you, no land, no money, no future beyond the next season's wages." "My father wants me to be happy," Catherine said, moving closer to him. "And you make me happy, Jack Morrison. These past few weeks I have looked forward to seeing you every day. I think about our conversations when I am supposed to be doing chores. I dream about you at night." If that is not love, it is certainly the beginning of it. Jack reached out and cupped her face with one calloused hand, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his skin. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Catherine Hartwell, I am not going to be able to pretend anymore. I am not going to be able to just be the hired hand who tips his hat and keeps his distance. I will want more, want everything." "Then stop talking and kiss me," Catherine whispered, and Jack did. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might change her mind. But Catherine pressed closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she had seen other courting couples exchange. It was fire and promise and the taste of forever, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "We should talk to your father," Jack said, though he did not move away from her. "I want to do this properly. I want to court you the right way with his blessing." "He is going to be difficult about it," Catherine warned. "He already lectured me about being careful with my heart." "Then I will just have to prove to him that I am worth taking a chance on," Jack replied. "I may not have land or money now, but I am a hard worker and I learn fast. I can build something, Catherine. I can build a future for us if you are willing to wait for me." "I will wait," Catherine promised, and she kissed him again to seal the words. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and when Samuel Hartwell saw them through the window, his expression shifted from surprise to resignation to something that might have been acceptance. He met them at the front door, his arms crossed over his chest. "I suppose this is happening then," he said, looking from his daughter to Jack and back again. "Papa, Jack and I would like your blessing to court," Catherine said, lifting her chin in a gesture Samuel recognized from her childhood. It was the look she got when she had made up her mind and nothing was going to change it. Samuel turned his attention to Jack. "What are your intentions toward my daughter, Morrison?" "To marry her, sir, if she will have me," Jack replied without hesitation. "I know I do not have much to offer right now, but I am asking for the chance to prove myself. I will work harder than any man you have ever employed. I will save every penny I can. And I will treat your daughter with the respect and love she deserves every day of my life." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying Jack with the same penetrating gaze he used when evaluating livestock or judging a man's character. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Catherine saved your life, Morrison, and in doing so, she showed me that she has become a woman capable of making her own choices. I am not going to stand in her way if this is what she wants, but I am also not going to make it easy for you. If you want to marry my daughter, you are going to have to prove you can provide for her properly. That means more than just working as a hired hand. That means building something that will last." "I understand, sir," Jack said, "and I accept your terms." "Good. Then let us talk about your future, because if you are going to be part of this family eventually, you need to start thinking like a rancher instead of a drifter." What followed was a conversation that stretched long into the night, with Samuel Hartwell outlining his expectations, and Jack Morrison listening carefully and asking smart questions. Catherine sat with them, occasionally adding her own thoughts, and watched as her father and the man she loved began to build a grudging respect for each other. Samuel proposed that Jack work at the Double H for 1 full year, learning not just the day-to-day operations of cattle ranching but also the business side of running a ranch. If Jack proved himself capable and responsible during that time, Samuel would help him secure a loan to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the Double H. It would not be much at first, maybe enough for a modest herd and a small house, but it would be a start. It would be a foundation to build on. Jack accepted the terms without hesitation, and they shook hands on the agreement. Catherine felt tears of joy prick her eyes as she watched the two most important men in her life forge an unexpected partnership. The year that followed was one of the happiest of Catherine's life, despite the hard work and occasional setbacks. She and Jack were allowed to court openly, and they spent their rare free time together, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Jack proved himself to be everything he had promised. He worked from dawn until dusk, learning every aspect of ranch management from Samuel and the experienced hands. He studied the ranch account books at night, teaching himself basic business principles by the light of an oil lamp. And he saved every penny he could, building toward the future he and Catherine had envisioned together. Their courtship was the talk of Redemption Springs, the romantic story of the falsely accused cowboy and the rancher's daughter who had saved him. People whispered that it was like something out of one of those dime novels, though Catherine thought the reality was far better than any story could be. Real love was not just dramatic moments and grand gestures. It was Jack bringing her coffee in the morning when she was tired. It was Catherine mending his shirts and adding extra stitching so they would last longer. It was the way they worked together when they could, moving in comfortable synchronization like they had been partners for years instead of months. As the seasons changed, from summer to fall to winter and finally to spring again, their love deepened. They had their first argument, a heated discussion about whether to raise cattle or horses, and learned how to work through disagreements without damaging their relationship. They celebrated Jack's 26th birthday with a cake Catherine baked herself, which turned out lopsided but tasted delicious nonetheless. They attended the town's annual harvest dance together, scandalizing some of the older residents by dancing every dance together instead of observing the propriety of sharing partners. Samuel watched his daughter's happiness and found his own resistance melting away. Jack Morrison had proven himself to be hardworking, honest, and completely devoted to Catherine. More importantly, he made her laugh and listened to her opinions, treating her as an equal partner rather than a possession. Samuel could not ask for more than that. When the year was finally up, Samuel called Jack into his office. Catherine waited outside, too nervous to sit still. She paced the hallway, twisting her hands together and wondering what her father was saying. Inside the office, Samuel poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Jack. "You have kept your end of our bargain, Morrison. You have worked hard, learned fast, and proved yourself capable. More importantly, you have made my daughter happy. I could not ask for more than that." "Thank you, sir," Jack said, accepting the glass but not drinking yet. "Your respect means everything to me." "I have arranged the loan for the land parcel we discussed," Samuel continued. "It is a good piece of property, about 200 acres with water access and enough grass to support a small herd. The house on it needs work, but it has good bones. You and Catherine can fix it up together, if she is willing to live in a place that is not as grand as the ranch house she grew up in." "Catherine would live in a tent if that is all I had to offer," Jack said with a smile, "but I appreciate your help in giving us something better to start with." "There is one more thing," Samuel said, and his expression turned serious. "I am not getting any younger, Jack, and I have no sons to inherit this ranch. Catherine is my only heir, which means that someday the Double H will belong to her and to whoever she marries. I need to know that when that day comes, you will take care of this place, respect what I built here, and treat the people who work for you fairly. Can you promise me that?" Jack met Samuel's eyes steadily. "I promise, sir. I will honor everything you have built here, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of your daughter and the trust you are placing in me." Samuel nodded, satisfied, and raised his glass. "Then welcome to the family, son. Now get out there and propose to my daughter properly before she wears a hole in my hallway floor with all that pacing." Jack found Catherine outside, and the smile on his face told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. He dropped to one knee right there in the dusty ranch yard, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Catherine Hartwell, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me hope when I had none, purpose when I was drifting, and love when I thought I would spend my life alone. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my days proving that I am worthy of you?" "Yes," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Later, Catherine would learn that he had saved for months to buy it, that he had ridden to the jeweler in Austin on his one day off and picked it out himself, that he had carried it with him every day for the past 2 months waiting for the right moment. They were married in late spring of 1886, exactly 1 year and 1 month after Jack had first been arrested. The ceremony took place in the small church in Redemption Springs, with what seemed like half the county in attendance. Even Sheriff Hutchins came, looking slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday best, but genuinely happy for the couple. Catherine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried wildflowers that Jack had picked for her that morning. Jack wore a new suit that Samuel had insisted on buying for him, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared made several of the older ladies fan themselves and tusk about impropriety. The celebration afterward was held at the Double H, with tables laden with food and a fiddler playing music for dancing. Samuel gave a toast that made Catherine cry, talking about how proud her mother would have been to see the woman their daughter had become. Old Pete, now officially retired but still living in a small cabin on ranch property, told embarrassing stories about teaching Catherine to ride when she was small. And Jack's former cellmate from the jail, a grizzled prospector named Charlie who had been locked up for public drunkenness the same week Jack was arrested, gave an impromptu speech about how sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best outcomes. As the sun set and the party continued, Jack and Catherine slipped away from the crowd. They walked to the top of the ridge that overlooked both the Double H and the small parcel of land that was now theirs. Below them, they could see the house that would be their home, modest but solid, waiting for them to make it their own. "Are you happy?" Jack asked, wrapping his arm around Catherine's waist and pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Catherine replied, leaning into his warmth. "A year ago, I was just a rancher's daughter who spent her days riding and reading and wondering if there was more to life than what I could see from horseback. Now I am a wife, a partner, a woman with a future full of possibilities." "A year ago, I thought my life was over," Jack said quietly. "I was facing the rope for a crime I did not commit, and I had accepted that the world was not fair and justice did not always prevail. Then you walked into that jail cell and changed everything." "We changed everything together," Catherine corrected. "I found the evidence, but you never gave up hope. Even when things looked darkest, you kept your dignity and your faith that the truth would come out. That is what made me believe in you." They stood there as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over Jack's lonely nights as a drifter and Catherine's restless evenings as a young woman yearning for something more. Now those stars looked down on two people who had found what they were searching for in each other. The first year of their marriage was challenging but deeply satisfying. They worked together to fix up the house, spending long days repairing the roof, replacing rotted floorboards, and painting the walls. Catherine discovered she had a talent for making a house feel like a home, arranging their few pieces of furniture to best advantage and sewing curtains for the windows. Jack proved to be handy with carpentry, building shelves for Catherine's growing collection of books and a large table where they could share their meals. They started their herd with 20 head of cattle, purchased with the loan Samuel had helped them secure. It was not much compared to the hundreds of cattle on the Double H, but it was theirs, and they tended those animals like they were precious treasures. Jack worked his own land during the day and still helped out at the Double H when Samuel needed extra hands, refusing to completely separate himself from the ranch that had given him his start. Catherine managed the household and helped with the cattle, proving herself as capable with ranch work as she had always claimed. Their first winter together was harsh, with ice storms that killed several of their cattle and threatened their fragile finances. They huddled together in their small house, burning precious firewood to stay warm and worrying about whether they would make it through to spring. But they did make it together, learning that they were stronger as a team than either of them could have been alone. By their first anniversary, they had not only survived but begun to thrive. Their herd had grown to 35 head, and Jack had made enough profit to start paying back his loan. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in the summer of 1887, and the joy on Jack's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his expression shift from confusion to understanding to pure elation. "A baby," Jack repeated, then let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "Catherine, we are going to be parents. Careful," she cautioned, though she was smiling. "You do not want to jostle the baby." Jack set her down carefully, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I just want you to know that you are the luckiest baby in all of Texas because you have the most wonderful mother in the world." Catherine stroked his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had once been a stranger accused of a crime and was now the center of her universe. "And the best father," she added softly. Samuel was overjoyed at the news of his impending grandparenthood. He immediately began planning additions to Jack and Catherine's house, insisting that they would need more room for the baby. Jack protested that they could manage, but Samuel would not hear of it. "You are family now," Samuel said firmly, "and family takes care of family. Besides, I am going to be a grandfather. That gives me the right to spoil my grandchild, and I am starting with making sure he or she has a proper nursery." The baby was born in March of 1888, during a late winter storm that tested everyone's nerves. The midwife from town could not get through the snow-drifted roads, so Samuel and Jack delivered the baby themselves while Catherine alternated between screaming at them both and apologizing for screaming. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Jack cried openly as he held his son for the first time. "A boy," he said wonderingly. "Catherine, we have a son." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. Jack looked at Samuel, who stood in the doorway with tears streaming down his weathered face. "Samuel," Jack said. "Samuel James Morrison, after the man who gave me a second chance and taught me what it means to be a father." The older Samuel wiped his eyes roughly. "That is a fine name." A fine name for a fine boy. Little Sam, as they called him, was a happy baby who grew into a curious toddler. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's quick smile, and he was absolutely adored by everyone who met him. Samuel Sr. spent hours teaching his grandson to ride, starting him on a gentle old mare when the boy was barely 2 years old. Catherine read to her son every night, determined that he would love books as much as she and Jack did. And Jack worked harder than ever, driven by his desire to provide for his growing family and build something lasting that he could pass on to his son. By 1890, 5 years after Jack's arrest and vindication, the Morrison Ranch had grown to rival some of the mid-sized spreads in the county. They ran over 200 head of cattle, employed 3 full-time ranch hands, and had paid off their original loan completely. Jack and Catherine had expanded their house, adding a proper second story with bedrooms for their children. The plural was necessary because Catherine was pregnant again, this time with twins. The twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Elizabeth, arrived in the fall of 1890. Life became wonderfully chaotic with 3 children under the age of 3. Catherine sometimes joked that she had traded her peaceful life as a rancher's daughter for the controlled chaos of motherhood, but she would not change a thing. Jack was a devoted father, making time to play with his children even after long days working the ranch. He taught little Sam to care for the horses and read to the twins before bed, doing silly voices for all the characters until they giggled uncontrollably. Samuel Sr. remained a constant presence in their lives, dividing his time between the Double H and the Morrison Ranch. He had slowed down a bit with age, but he still rode every day and involved himself in both operations. He had started talking about officially merging the 2 ranches, Combining the double H and the Morrison spread into one large operation that Jack and Catherine would eventually inherit completely. One evening in late 1892, Samuel came to dinner at the Morrison house and made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I met a woman," he said abruptly, looking uncomfortable. "A widow from Austin who moved to Redemption Springs to be near her sister. Her name is Martha, and she is kind and makes me laugh. I would like you to meet her, Catherine." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. Her father had been alone since her mother died 19 years ago, devoted entirely to raising her and running the ranch. She had never imagined he might find love again. "Papa, I would love to meet her," Catherine said, reaching across the table to squeeze her father's hand. "You deserve to be happy." "Your mother was the love of my life," Samuel said quietly. "Martha is not replacing her. But maybe there is room in a heart for more than one great love in a lifetime." Jack raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, looking meaningfully at Catherine, "and to finding love when you least expect it." They all drank to that, even little Sam, who was allowed a sip of lemonade for the toast. The evening dissolved into comfortable conversation, with Sam pestering his grandfather about the new woman until Samuel laughingly promised to bring Martha around for a proper introduction. Martha Powell proved to be everything Samuel had said and more. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with laugh lines around her eyes and a warmth that immediately put Catherine at ease. She had been widowed 5 years earlier when her husband died in a construction accident, and she had spent those years raising her own children who were now grown and starting families of their own. She and Samuel courted for 6 months, before marrying in a quiet ceremony in early 1893, and Catherine gained not just a stepmother but a friend. Life settled into a new rhythm, with both the Morrison Ranch and the Double H prospering. The formal merger Samuel had proposed took place in 1894, creating one of the largest cattle operations in West Texas. Jack became equal partner with Samuel in running the combined ranch, and Catherine took over managing the business accounts, applying the sharp mind that had once uncovered a rustler's journal to keeping their finances in order. They had 2 more children, another boy named Peter born in 1893, and a daughter named Sarah born in 1895. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running in and out and ranch hands stopping by for meals. Catherine often thought about how far they had come from that day in the jail cell when she had shown Jack the evidence of his innocence. Everything good in her life now stemmed from that decision to seek the truth. Jack seemed to be thinking similar thoughts one evening in the summer of 1895, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the combined ranch lands. The children were finally asleep after a long day of play, and they had a rare moment of peace together. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not found that journal?" Jack asked, reaching for Catherine's hand. "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "But then I remind myself that I did find it because I was looking for the truth instead of accepting the easy answer. That is the choice we always have to make, I think. Do we accept what we are told, or do we dig deeper to find out what is really true?" "You taught me that," Jack said. "I had accepted my fate. I thought there was no point fighting against injustice because the world is not fair and the odds were stacked against me. You showed me that one person looking for truth can change everything." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, comfortable in the warmth of his presence. "We changed everything together. You gave me purpose and adventure. Before you, I was just a rancher's daughter with no real direction. I did not know what I wanted from life beyond escaping the boredom of daily routine. You showed me that love and family and building something with your own hands is the greatest adventure there is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep. The cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called to its mate. The stars began to appear overhead, those same faithful stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. "I love you, Catherine Morrison," Jack said softly. I loved you from the moment you walked into that jail cell and looked at me like I was worth saving. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "You are my greatest adventure, Jack Morrison. Every day with you is a gift." As the years passed, their love only deepened. They faced challenges together, including a drought in 1896 that tested their ranch's resources, and a bout of influenza in 1898 that swept through the county and left several children seriously ill. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together during the good times. Their children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Sam, the oldest, showed a natural talent for working with horses and talked about becoming a horse trainer. Thomas and Elizabeth, the twins, were inseparable and both loved learning, constantly asking questions and reading every book they could find. Peter was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring places he should not go. And little Sarah, the baby, was a perfect blend of both her parents, with her mother's determination and her father's gentle nature. Samuel Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1901, with Martha at his side. It was a loss that shook the whole family, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived a full life and died happy, surrounded by the family he loved. Catherine delivered the eulogy at his funeral, talking about how her father had taught her to value truth and justice, and how those lessons had shaped the course of her entire life. "My father once told me that a man's word used to mean something in this territory," Catherine said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He lived by that principle every day of his life. His word was his bond, and his commitment to truth and fairness guided every decision he made. He taught me to look beyond surface appearances and seek the deeper truth, and that lesson led me to the greatest love of my life. Papa, thank you for believing in justice. Thank you for accepting Jack into our family, and thank you for showing me what it means to live with integrity. We will miss you every day, but we will honor your memory by living the values you taught us." Jack stood beside her, holding her hand as she spoke, and when she broke down at the end, he was there to support her. The children surrounded them, and in that moment of shared grief, Catherine felt the strength of the family they had built together. The ranch continued to prosper under Jack and Catherine's management, with Martha remaining involved as an advisor but mostly focusing on her own pursuits. She had developed an interest in education and worked to establish a proper schoolhouse in Redemption Springs, ensuring that children in the area had access to learning. Catherine supported her stepmother's efforts enthusiastically, serving on the school board and donating books to the school library. By 1905, 20 years after Jack's arrest and vindication, the Morrison family had become one of the most respected in West Texas. Their ranch employed over 50 people, and they had diversified beyond cattle to include horse breeding and farming. Jack had fulfilled his promise to Samuel to build something lasting, and he had done it through hard work, integrity, and the unwavering support of his wife. Their children were growing into remarkable adults. Sam, now 17, was already working the ranch full-time and had a natural gift for leadership that reminded Catherine of her father. The twins, Thomas and Elizabeth at 15, were both excelling in school and talking about college, which would have been almost unthinkable a generation earlier. Peter at 12 was still adventurous, but had developed a love of wildlife and talked about becoming a naturalist. And Sarah at 10 was showing signs of her mother's analytical mind and her father's compassion. One evening, the whole family gathered for dinner at the main ranch house, which had been expanded and modernized over the years, but still retained its essential character. The conversation was lively, with everyone sharing stories from their day. Sam talked about training a difficult horse that was finally responding to his methods. Elizabeth described a book she was reading about the settlement of the frontier. Peter announced that he had seen a golden eagle near the north pasture. And Sarah wanted to know why some people were rich and others were poor, a question that led to a deep discussion about economics and social justice. After dinner, Catherine and Jack took their customary walk around the property. It was a ritual they had maintained for years, this time to reconnect and talk without the chaos of family life interrupting. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Catherine asked, her arm linked through Jack's. 20 years since I was arrested, 20 years since you saved my life, 19 years since we got married," Jack recited. "Every moment has been worth it, Catherine, even the hard times because we faced them together." "Do you ever regret not having more?" Catherine asked quietly. "You could have been anything, Jack. You are smart and hardworking. Maybe if you had not married me, you could have done something different with your life." Jack stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands cupping her face gently. "Catherine Morrison, you are still the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose, and love that fills every corner of my life. I would not change a single thing about the path that led me to you, even being falsely accused and thrown in jail. Because that is when you found me, when you saw me for who I really was and decided I was worth fighting for." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. After 20 years together, he could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you so much. Sometimes I think my heart cannot possibly hold any more love for you, and then you say something like that and I realize love just keeps growing." They kissed there under the stars, a kiss that held 2 decades of history and the promise of decades more to come. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "Come on," Jack said, taking her hand. "Let us go home, we have a life to keep living." And they did. They lived that life with joy and passion, and an unwavering commitment to each other and the family they had built. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. They became grandparents when Sam married a kind young woman named Grace and had the first of many grandchildren. They weathered economic downturns and personal losses. They celebrated victories and supported each other through defeats. Through it all, the foundation of their relationship remained solid. They had been forged in fire, their love born from injustice overcome and truth revealed. They had chosen each other against the odds, and they kept choosing each other every single day. Catherine never forgot the feeling of walking into that jail cell and seeing Jack's green eyes for the first time since his arrest, the desperation and hope warring in his expression. Jack never forgot the courage it took for Catherine to stand up for a drifter when the whole town thought he was guilty. Those memories became part of their family story, told and retold to children and grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. As they grew older together, their love mellowed and deepened like fine wine. They held hands during evening walks. They finished each other's sentences. They could communicate with just a look across a crowded room. They had become so intertwined that it was hard to remember a time when they had been separate people rather than two halves of one whole. In 1920, on their 34th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running around, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Catherine, now 53 years old but still beautiful with silver threading through her dark hair, stood beside Jack, now 59, and looked around at everything they had created. "This," she said softly to Jack, gesturing at the chaos of family surrounding them, "this is what truth and justice look like. This is what happens when one person decides to dig deeper and find what is real instead of accepting easy lies." Jack pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "This is what love looks like when two people commit to building something together. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, Catherine. You believed in me when no one else did, and you loved me enough to fight for the truth. I have spent every day since then trying to be worthy of that love." "You are worthy," Catherine assured him. "You have always been worthy. I just helped everyone else see it." As the sun set on another day at the ranch, painting the Texas sky in shades of crimson and gold, Jack and Catherine Morrison stood together and watched their family celebrate. They had come so far from that dusty jail cell in Redemption Springs, from the desperate moment when injustice seemed certain to prevail. They had built a life together, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. And as the stars began to appear overhead, those faithful witnesses to their journey, Jack and Catherine knew that every hardship they had endured, every obstacle they had overcome, had been worth it. Because they had found what everyone searches for and so few actually discover: a love that transforms, a partnership that endures, and a truth that sets you free in every possible way. Their story became legend in West Texas, told around dinner tables and campfires for generations. The tale of the falsely accused cowboy and the rancher's daughter who found the proof that set him free, who fell in love while seeking justice, and built an empire on a foundation of truth. It was a story of courage and determination, of looking beyond surface appearances to find what is real, of standing up for what is right even when the whole world seems arrayed against you. But more than anything, it was a love story. The kind of love story that reminds us that sometimes the greatest adventures begin in the darkest moments, that hope can spring from despair, and that true love is worth fighting for no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Jack and Catherine Morrison lived long lives filled with love, family, and purpose. They died within months of each other in the late 1920s, having spent over 40 years together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the endless Texas sky and those same faithful stars that had watched over them from the very beginning. And their descendants, who continued to work the land and uphold the values of truth and justice that Jack and Catherine had embodied, made sure their story was never forgotten. Because some love stories are too powerful to fade away, too important to be lost to time. They become part of the landscape itself, woven into the fabric of a place and a people, reminding every generation that follows what is possible when you have courage, integrity, and love. The end of Catherine and Jack's story was really just the beginning of a legacy that would continue for generations. A legacy built on the simple but profound truth that one person standing up for what is right can change everything. And that love found against the odds is the strongest love of all.